Our first reading this morning is taken from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. After Jesus' birth, which happened in Bethlehem of Judea during the reign of Herod, astrologers from the east arrived in Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the newborn ruler of the Jews? We observed his star rising and have come to pay homage." At this news, Herod became greatly disturbed, as did all of Jerusalem. Summoning all the chief priests and religious scholars of the people, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem of Judea," they informed him. "Here is what the prophet has written. And you, Bethlehem, land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah, since from you will come a ruler who is shepherd to my people Israel." Herod called the astrologers aside and found out from them the exact time of the star's appearance. Then he sent them to Bethlehem. After having instructed them, "Go and get detailed information about the child. And when you have found him, report back to me so that I may go and offer homage too." After their audience with the ruler, they set out. The star which they had observed at its rising went ahead of them until it came to a standstill over the place where the child lay. They were overjoyed at seeing the star, and upon entering the house, they found the child with Mary, his mother. They prostrated themselves and paid homage. Then they opened their coffers and presented the child with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. They were warned in a dream not to return to Herod, so they went back to their own country by another route. This is the end of our first reading.
This is the second reading, and it's an excerpt from Ethics for a New Millennium by His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet. When, as individuals, we disarm ourselves internally through centering our negative thoughts and emotions and cultivating positive qualities, we create the conditions for external disarmament. Indeed, genuine, lasting world peace will only be possible as a result of each of us making an effort internally. Afflictive emotion is the oxygen of conflict. It is thus essential that we remain sensitive to others and, recognizing their equal right to happiness, do nothing that could contribute to their suffering. One thing is for certain: given human beings' love of truth, justice, peace, and freedom, creating a better, more compassionate world is a genuine possibility. The potential is there. If, with the help of education and the proper use of the media, we can combine some of the initiatives suggested here with the implementation of ethical principles, we will have within our reach a climate in which disarmament and military disestablishment become totally uncontroversial. On the basis of this, we will have created the conditions for lasting world peace. This is the second reading.
Well, thank you all for making time for us this Christmas week. I know it's been very busy. We had set this up as a virtual service originally to help our volunteers get off the time. We weren't really thinking of COVID, but as you know, this has been a tough week in Austin. And our last class we had 13 people in the class, and 7 of them had been personally touched by COVID this week. Somebody in their family, our immediate friends. We had a quartet scheduled for Christmas Eve, and half of the people contracted COVID. So not sure what this next week will be. We will find out. But again, thank you for sharing the morning with us, particularly because this is kind of the downer Sunday of the Christmas season. This is the season when we have to talk about Herod, his pursuit of the children, the slaughter of the innocents. And it's a real step down. It's kind of a bummer after the week of, celebrating the birth of the child and, singing the Magnificat, where, Jesus is called all these wonderful names, ruler of rulers and all of that. And now all of a sudden he's essentially a wanted criminal. He will step in and out of that condition the rest of his life. He'll be in trouble with the establishment the rest of his life. He will become a refugee, an immigrant. And so in a sense, what this passage is kind of forcing us to do is to make a decision between Herod, the powers that be, and this young child that has been born. I know the temptation to just leave Herod out of the story, and my entire career, I've had people come up and say, why don't you just leave the politics out? Let's just learn how to love, and that will be enough. I understand that 100%. That was my intention when I was in seminary, to not rock any boats and to be popular, be in a big church with, lots and lots of people. But life has a funny way of teaching us things. And I think this part of the Christmas story reminds us that love without justice is hollow. That at some point we have decisions to make of whether we are going to stand up for the oppressed or side with Herod. One of the disastrous decisions in church history is to praise Jesus and serve Herod, essentially, to support whatever empire you're born into, whatever power hierarchy you're born into. That in a sense, this story is the part of the Christmas narrative that reminds us that we have decisions to make if we want a better world. I think the greatest example of that for me is the famous story of the Christmas truce from World War I, where there was a moment where some of the soldiers heard people singing the same hymns across the trenches and joined in singing. Some of the people were singing in English, some in French, some in German, but they were the same tunes and things. And what that reminds us is that people on both sides of that war, of those trenches, were Christians. And both sides, the priests and clergy, were praying for their side and not for the other side. I think when we think of that, we realize there has to be something bigger and deeper than the Christianity within nations. Particularly when we realize that after they had the truce, they played soccer, they allowed each other to bury their own dead. The generals forced them to stop talking to each other. They went back to war, and they very soon were using gas warfare, asphyxiating gases that would kill the people that they had loved not that long ago. So to me, the Christmas truce has got to be the story, the example of how not to do it. Somehow we have to find a way to step out of the systems that inevitably lead us to conflict and to war. It was a big surprise for me in the ministry to learn how easy it is to be inspirational. It's almost scary how easy it is to give people positive feelings. And I understand that's why many people come to church. You want those feelings of warmth, of acceptance. But what I've learned is without insights, those feelings come and go. That what you're needing, deeper than me making you feel a certain way, is for you to learn the principles where you're in charge of your own feelings, your own thoughts. So I feel that when I try to be inspirational without insights, when I try to give you feelings without revelation, I might as well be selling drugs, right? That make people feel a certain way, but they're not changing the minds and the hearts, because that's what we're looking for. That's what we're needing, is how can I feel peaceful and joyful all the time? In order to do that, that has to come from within you. There's no teacher, there's no preacher, there's no book, there's no practice that can reliably give us those things that we're looking for. So the reason I'm going to talk about Herod today, the reason I'm going to talk about politics, maybe not specifically, but the importance of stepping out of systems of power, is because Christmas, when it all comes down, is not just about a personal savior. It's about the announcement of a new age of peace, joy for the whole world. And when we take that message out of Christianity, I think we leave people poorer and we betray the gift that we need to be giving. So when we think of this story, part of this story of the astrologers from another place that find Jesus is that when we get to love, we usually have to let go of the beliefs that led us to that point. What I mean is, all of us initially enter religion for the most part to feel better. We want a system of meaning. And if it works for us in our personal life, the fact that it doesn't change the world doesn't bother us that much usually. But when we give up on the world, when we choose a set of beliefs that make us feel that we'll be saved, but they let the world go to hell, I believe something dies inside us. I believe that we are made for each other, that every one of us is called to serve the whole of humankind and of the web of life, not just our country, not just our business, not just our religion, but the whole. Like the astrologers, we all start off kind of groping. Now, I don't personally believe in astrology. I know that some people in the congregation do. But I'm not attacking astrology to say that these astrologers got lost, right? They didn't go to the manger. They went to Jerusalem, which tells you that they were doing some projecting there. They thought they were following stars, but they went to the wrong place. And because they weren't political, because they were just trying to find a system of meaning, they went to the worst person in the world in terms of this new revelation. They went to Herod. They went to the one person who would try to kill this baby if he knew about it. So they go and say, we see that a new ruler has been born into the world. And Herod kind of thought that was him. So when they go to Herod, it's like when we try to be Christian and we ignore things like voter suppression. We ignore things like the lack of medical care, the lack of rights for every person. However you feel about the political spectrum, at some point, we have to say that everybody has a place in our world. So in addition to feeling love for other people, we have to respect their humanity and their rights. So the first point when I say we have to choose love over belief is we have to let go of the system that got us there, whether it's astrology or psychology or theology. Ideas can only get you so far. And no matter how true the system is, we start off with it superstitiously. I mean, if I read Einstein, that doesn't make me a scientist, right? I'm going to be reading Einstein at the level of my understanding, which isn't real great. So to realize that These people were wise for themselves. They had found a system that worked for them. But because they weren't political, because they didn't have discernment about what their life and choices meant to other people, they did great violence, not meaning to. So the promise here is not that you'll have a star in the sky that you can see physically, but there's a star inside of you. There's a light inside of you that's blossoming, it's growing. And the system operating on the best system you have of meaning is the only option we have. We all start off as beginners. Nothing wrong with that. But we have to let go of the beliefs that make us comfortable so that we can grow into a greater love. So that's number one. When we get to love, we have to let go of belief. Second, when we get to love, we have to let go of power. We don't leave the world of politics by pretending like nothing is happening. When we don't help people that are being afflicted, we're not neutral. What I've discovered in my journeys is there is no sideline to history. There's no neutral ground. As a male, all I have to do is not complain about patriarchy. I just have to claim my rights as a male, and I become a problem for women. As a white person, all I have to do is say my history is sacrosanct. The story of America as told from white people, to insist upon that may seem not political, but it's the very heart of politics. It's just choosing the status quo, and choosing the status quo is a political act. We just don't count it as such. So to realize that there's a sense in which we're all born someplace on the totem pole of power, the hierarchy of power. There's nothing wrong with us. It's not our fault that happens to us. But if we don't realize that, we can hurt people without ever meaning to, because we use our power selfishly and we don't even realize it. So Jesus calls us out of our place of power. This is something that's very controversial. I understand that. But if you look at the story, there's no other way to look at it. The word for church, ecclesia, means to be called out. Unless we become bigger, unless our love becomes bigger than our nation, then we will go to war. Unless our love becomes bigger than our belief system, then we will embrace superstitions. So when Jesus starts off his teaching by saying, blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor, when he collects all the people that are rejected, I mean, think about the Christmas story. Astrologers were seen as heretics. The shepherds were seen as unclean. And they're at the unwed mother, soon to be an immigrant. And this child that's going to rock every boat of the culture. Jesus is crucified as a criminal. And we have to understand that you can't see Jesus as somebody who's culturally accepted. I know that when I began ministry, it was like I was supposed to pray before softball games and pray at meals, but I was never supposed to rock the boat. It's just really hard to follow Jesus and stay in that popular, numb place. If we want a different world, we need to be different kinds of people. So our story today is helping us realize at some point we have to choose between Herod and the power and the acceptance and the cultural rewards, and this little baby who now becomes a problem for the empire. Herod is supposed to be the ruler. This new child is talking about a new hope. And so now Herod is going to move heaven and earth to try to kill this child. At this story, we realize we have to choose between Herod and this child. The image that's there is very poignant. The word infant in French I believe means unable to speak. So you have this child who's absolutely defenseless, and yet you're being asked to choose this child over the glory, the power, the love of country of a Herod. That what this child is leading us to is a new age where there's a place for every person everywhere. And it doesn't erase countries. It doesn't erase the need for armies, but it changes the world. The world is no longer based on that, if we ever really tried this. So we need to choose love over belief, love over power. And maybe the hardest thing to do for we human beings is to choose what is being born over what is dying. We live in a time when many old systems that have given us meaning and purpose are dying. The North may have won the Civil War in some ways, but there's other ways in which the South has risen again. There's a flag that you sometimes see in right-wing protests where there's a hand coming down and lifting up the American flag, and there's a Confederate flag underneath it. For some people, when they talk about love of America, that's what they're talking about. Not the love of their fellow Americans, not the love of the land, not the love of democracy, but this kind of false America that was stillborn and never grew to include everyone. So to choose what is being born over what is dying means that we're called into some very controversial places. The old world, the world that is setting, the sun that is setting. One of the stories about the infant narratives is it's the birth of the sun. That it's not just a human being, it's a new age. It's a new era of hope and enlightenment. So to follow Jesus and to leave Herod in many ways means to side with the refugees, to side with the women in the hard situation of reproductive rights, where they at least belong to themselves. And choosing a history that includes every voice, not just the ones that are popular in the history of the past. There's a new age being born. It's a new hope for America. It's a better America. It's a truer America. It's the vision that the founders had, but they couldn't realize. When I went to Bethlehem to see supposedly the place that Jesus was born, and we realized this is mythological. It doesn't happen in history. It's talking about something that's always happening. I was very moved to see on the bottom of the cave. It wasn't a barn. It was a cave, and on the ground was a golden emblem of the sun. So even in those ancient days, when you first started honoring this story, they realized that it happened way before Israel. The solstice is a hope in times when we don't have light to see, that there's something being born in the midst of what seems to be dying. So I think it's very important to include Herod in the story, to include the political, and for me to try to give you insight as much as inspiration. I love it when sermons are inspirational to you, but what you need are the insights, and then you'll find your own inspiration. But our story today tells us that we're never going to understand love fully from within our system of belief. We're never going to understand and experience love completely from our position of power. And we'll never understand and experience love as long as we get our identity from that which is dying and not from that which is being born. The promise of the story is that we become the light of the world when we say yes to this new age. I want to close with a saying by Alice Walker, and I'll read it twice because it's kind of deep. She said, "When life descends into the pit, I must become my own candle willingly burning myself to light up the darkness all around me. Again, when life descends into the pit, I must become my own candle, willingly burning myself to light up the darkness around me. Well, that's my understanding of this passage, but you don't have to agree with me. We're going to take a minute for you to think about how you would have interpreted this passage had you been preaching it. So again, thank you for your attention.